Hi, automotive enthusiasts. Welcome to Octane Origins. Today, we're diving into one of the most pivotal motorcycles ever built, the 1972 Kawasaki Z1 900, often called the original Superbike. This isn't just another classic machine. It's the story of how a Japanese manufacturer turned the motorcycle world upside down, redefined what performance meant for the street, and ignited an arms race that still echoes through every sport bike rolling off assembly lines today. Before the Z1 arrived, the Honda CB750 had taken the spotlight as the world's first mass-produced four-cylinder motorcycle, offering riders an unprecedented mix of performance and reliability. Kawasaki had been watching closely, and instead of rushing a direct competitor to market, they quietly set out to build something that would leapfrog the competition entirely. What emerged in 1972 was a 903cc double overhead cam four-cylinder that stunned riders with its raw speed, its bulletproof durability, and its sheer presence on the road. At over 80 horsepower, it was the most powerful production motorcycle of its day, and at the same time, it could be ridden daily without fear of breakdown. A balance that made it not just a machine but a cultural event. Today's video will trace this remarkable story in 3 sweeping movements: how the Z1 was conceived and born against the backdrop of fierce global competition, how it rose to legendary status by pushing both engineering boundaries and rider expectations, and how its legacy reshaped motorcycling culture for decades to come. This won't be a dry spec sheet, but a living history of ambition, rivalry, and impact. We'll explore the hidden decisions behind Kawasaki's gamble, the way real riders experienced this rocket on wheels, and the ripple effects that carried into racing, engineering, and even the way bikes are marketed. By the end, you'll see why the Z1 900 is not just a collectible classic, but a machine that crystallized the very idea of the superbike. So settle in, because this is more than nostalgia. It's the story of how one motorcycle captured the future before anyone else saw it coming, and why that matters every time you hear the howl of a four-cylinder today. Kawasaki's journey to the Z1 began with a sense of unfinished business. While Honda's CB750 had stunned the world in 1969, Kawasaki had already been deep into a project of their own, one that was shelved at the last minute when Honda beat them to market. Rather than concede defeat, Kawasaki's engineers and managers made a daring decision. If they couldn't be first, they would be bigger, stronger, and undeniably faster. This mindset seeded the machine that would become the Z1 900, but the road there was filled with risks and uncertainty, especially for a company that was still finding its footing in the global motorcycle industry. Micro story. The decision to chase a larger displacement engine was not a given. Kawasaki had already been developing a 750cc four-cylinder known internally as Project N600, but once Honda's CB750 arrived, the leadership realized that releasing a similar bike would only look like imitation, so they froze the program and pivoted, instructing engineers to reimagine the motorcycle as a 900cc machine with more advanced valve timing and double overhead cams. In doing so, they set the stage for a world first in production motorcycles, and the gamble was clear. If it failed, the resources invested could have crippled Kawasaki's ambitions for years. Context Digest. The early 1970s motorcycle market was more competitive than many realize. British brands like Triumph and Norton still had loyal riders. Harley-Davidson held the American cruiser identity, and Japanese makers were only beginning to be seen as equals rather than upstarts. Honda's CB750 had cracked that perception wide open, and Kawasaki's Z1 was aimed not only at performance, but also at credibility, signaling that the company could lead, not follow. Micro story. Developing the Z1 was a global effort. Kawasaki worked with American distributors and engineers to understand what US riders wanted. Since America was the largest market for big-bore motorcycles, test bikes were secretly run in Los Angeles and the desert highways of California, pushing prototypes to their limits while engineers back in Japan tuned durability and cooling. What they learned was clear. American riders craved raw speed and acceleration, but they also needed a bike that could handle long-distance cruising without shaking apart. This blend of requirements shaped the Z1 into something uniquely versatile. Reflection bridge. Every design choice was made under the pressure of surpassing Honda's achievement, And that rivalry gave the Z1 its sharp edge. Microstory. In 1972, when the Z1 finally launched, it was nothing short of a sensation. At 82 horsepower, it was the fastest production motorcycle in the world, capable of over 130 miles per hour, yet its refined engineering allowed it to idle smoothly and handle daily commutes without drama. Magazines at the time described it as revolutionary, and riders lined up for a chance to own what felt like a racing bike tamed for the street. The Z1's unmistakable 4x4 exhaust pipes gave it a muscular stance, and the paint scheme, often in bold candy tones, made it instantly recognizable. Context digest. The Z1's dominance wasn't just in straight-line speed. Its double overhead camshaft design was a leap beyond the single-cam layout of Honda's CB750, giving more precise valve control and higher rev potential. This was technology normally reserved for racing motorcycles, now available to the average buyer, which raised the bar for every manufacturer and forever altered expectations of what a street bike should deliver. Microstory. Stories from the early owners highlight how transformative the Z1 felt. One day you could commute through city streets with calm confidence, and the next day open the throttle on an open highway and feel acceleration like nothing before. Drag racers discovered the Z1's engine could handle serious modifications, and endurance racers found it could survive brutal hours of wide-open throttle. Its combination of speed and toughness gave it a reputation that spread by word of mouth, building mystique faster than advertising ever could. Reflection bridge. Kawasaki hadn't just built a competitor to Honda, they had redefined the category entirely, and other brands were now forced to rethink their strategies. Context digest. Within months, rival manufacturers began accelerating their own big-bore projects. Suzuki was preparing its GS line, Yamaha was refining its XS series, and Honda was forced to evolve beyond the CB750. This wasn't just competition, it was the birth of an escalating horsepower war that would carry through the 1970s and into the 1980s. The Z1 had set the stakes higher than anyone anticipated. Microstory. The Z1 also marked a turning point in Kawasaki's brand identity. Until then, the company was best known for smaller displacement bikes and utility machines. But the Z1's arrival recast Kawasaki as the maker of brute force performance. Advertising in the US leaned into the image of power and dominance, and riders began associating the brand with high speed and daring engineering choices, a reputation Kawasaki would carry into its GPZ, Ninja, and modern ZX lines. All of this momentum was only the beginning, because as the Z1 gained fame, it also attracted scrutiny, competition, and cultural meaning that went far beyond horsepower numbers, leading directly into the next stage of its remarkable story. As the Z1's reputation grew, it became more than a motorcycle. It became a cultural phenomenon that forced the industry to confront new realities. Riders now expected both performance and reliability, and Kawasaki had proven they could deliver, both at the highest level. This shift set in motion a series of developments that reshaped racing, engineering, and even how motorcycling was marketed worldwide. Microstory. One of the earliest proving grounds for the Z1 was endurance. Racing. Kawasaki entered the bike in the Daytona 200 and European long-distance events, where it astonished observers by not only keeping pace, but often outlasting rivals, machines that could endure hours of wide-open throttle without faltering quickly. Built a reputation for bulletproof strength, and the victories carried Kawasaki's name into the same conversations as long-established European legends. Suddenly, a Japanese four-cylinder wasn't seen as a novelty, but as a legitimate world-class contender. Context digest. The importance of endurance racing at the time cannot be overstated. Before the internet and social media, a win at Daytona or Bol d'Or translated directly into credibility in dealerships, where riders trusted that a bike capable of surviving brutal competition would certainly handle their daily lives. Kawasaki leveraged these results in marketing, positioning the Z1 not just as a speed machine, but as a trustworthy companion. Microstory. On the streets, the Z1 became a symbol of aspiration. In the United States, young riders saw it as the pinnacle of freedom, a bike that could blast down highways with a roar, but also handle a cross-country trip without complaint. Stories circulated of riders clocking tens of thousands of miles. With little more than oil changes, fueling the sense that this machine wasn't just fast, it was immortal. Its 4x4 exhaust note became instantly recognizable, and in many communities, the sound of a Z1 rolling up meant attention would follow. Reflection bridge. This combination of racing credibility and everyday reliability gave Kawasaki a brand image it had never possessed before. Micro story. Rival brands felt the pressure and responded. Honda pushed toward larger displacement machines. Yamaha experimented with new performance-oriented designs, and Suzuki developed models that would evolve into the fearsome GSX-R line. This competitive storm wasn't just about numbers on a spec sheet. It was about claiming identity in a marketplace suddenly obsessed with who could deliver the next superbike. The term itself gained traction during this period, often invoked directly in reference to the Z1. Context digest. The early to mid-1970s were also a time of broader cultural change. Motorcycles were not merely transport, they were becoming lifestyle symbols connected to music, film, and counterculture. The Z1 fit perfectly into this climate, offering a machine that looked rebellious, sounded ferocious, but could still be justified as a practical purchase. This duality gave it staying power across demographics, from young thrill seekers to middle-aged riders rediscovering freedom. Micro story. Dealers in the US reported that Z1s would sell almost as fast as they arrived, and Kawasaki faced the challenge of meeting demand while refining production. Owners often customized their machines with drag bars, cafe styling, or performance exhausts, and the aftermarket quickly flourished. In many ways, the Z1 helped create the modern motorcycle tuning culture, where a strong factory platform encouraged riders to personalize and push boundaries further. Reflection bridge. By sparking a performance race and a customization wave, the Z1 shaped not only Kawasaki's destiny, but the culture of riding itself. Context digest. The engineering lessons from the Z1 influenced Kawasaki's next generations of performance bikes. Its engine architecture became the basis for models like the KZ900 and KZ1000, which carried the lineage into police service, drag strips, and Hollywood films. This continuity reinforced the machine's status as more than a one-off success. It was the foundation of a dynasty. Micro story. Perhaps the clearest demonstration of its influence came from drag racing, where the Z1's robust bottom end and strong transmission allowed tuners to double horsepower with turbo kits and big-bore conversions. Records fell rapidly, and Kawasaki's green machines dominated the quarter mile. What started as a showroom bike had become the weapon of choice for riders chasing speed records, and its reputation for durability only deepened as modified engines survived. Abuses that would have destroyed lesser machines. The Z1 was no longer just Kawasaki's triumph. It had become the benchmark everyone else was chasing, setting up the final act of its story, the long-term legacy that would cement it as the blueprint for superbikes and the enduring symbol of an era. The E30 M3's racing career may have closed, but its influence only deepened as it transitioned into the realm of legend. What had once been a homologation obligation was now a collector's prize and a benchmark for engineers shaping the future of performance cars. The stakes had shifted. This was no longer about beating Ford or Mercedes on the track, but about how a single car could define a brand, a philosophy, and a community of enthusiasts for generations. Micro story. In the 1990s, as newer M3s arrived with six-cylinder engines and more comfort features, the original E30 stood apart as the purist's choice. Its lighter frame, simpler engineering, and raw feedback became qualities that enthusiasts began to cherish even more. At first, values remained modest, but those who held on to their cars soon realized they possessed something irreplaceable. The car's analog feel, its tight connection between driver and machine, and its championship pedigree set it apart from the wave of more complex, heavier performance cars that followed. Context digest. By the 2000s, collector markets began to notice the E30 M3. What had been a relatively affordable used car was now commanding higher prices at auctions, especially for rare special editions. Enthusiasts in the US and Europe alike started seeking out clean examples, and scarcity drove demand. The once accessible icon was transforming into an investment-grade vehicle. Microstory. Certain editions became legends within a legend. The Sport Evolution, with its larger displacement engine and adjustable aero, was seen as the pinnacle of factory-developed performance. The Sekoto and Rivalia editions, named after championship drivers, added cultural resonance, connecting road cars directly to motorsport heroes. Each of these variants carried not just technical upgrades, but also symbolic weight, reminding buyers that the E30 M3 wasn't just a car, it was a living piece of racing history. Reflection Bridge. What set the E30 M3 apart in its legacy years wasn't nostalgia alone. It was the authenticity of a machine built for a clear purpose, a trait that modern performance cars often struggle to replicate. Microstory. As technology advanced, enthusiasts looked back at the E30 M3 as a high-water mark of analog driving. There were no electronic aids, no drive modes, no artificial filters. You, the driver, were the only variable. This purity resonated especially in an era where digitalization was taking over, making the M3 feel timeless. Owners spoke of the joy in simply turning a steering wheel or working a gearbox that communicated with absolute clarity. Context Digest. Car culture in the United States also embraced the E30 M3. Import restrictions meant relatively few came across the Atlantic initially, but once they qualified for the 25-year rule, demand surged. American enthusiasts who had grown up reading about its European triumphs could finally own a piece of that history. As more cars landed on U.S. soil, the E30 M3's presence at shows and track days became a tangible reminder of its myth. Microstory. The rise of online communities in the 2010s amplified its cult following. Forums, videos, and social media created a network where stories of individual cars spread like folklore. One-off restorations, barn finds, and perfectly preserved examples all became part of the narrative, fueling the sense that the E30 M3 wasn't just a machine but a shared heritage. Each story, whether of a race-winning chassis or a daily driven survivor, added texture to the collective memory. Reflection Bridge. What had begun as a car built for compliance had grown into a cultural symbol, embodying both the spirit of motorsport and the joy of pure driving. Context Digest. By the 2020s, the E30 M3 was firmly established as a blue-chip collectible. Prices at auctions climbed past six figures for pristine examples, and even well-used cars commanded premiums. Yet beyond the numbers, its influence persisted in the design of modern M cars and countless imitators from other brands. Automakers continued to chase that elusive balance of lightness, precision, and everyday usability, the exact formula the E30 had perfected. Microstory. Today, the E30 M3's presence extends far beyond garages and racetracks. It appears in video games, documentaries, and pop culture references, symbolizing an era when racing technology and road car accessibility met perfectly. Younger generations who never saw it race in period still aspire to drive one, proving that the legend has outlived its time. Its squared-off silhouette and high-revving heartbeat have become icons not of the 1980s, but of performance driving itself. The E30 M3's journey from homologation special to global icon closes a remarkable loop. It began as a rulebook requirement, became the winningest touring car in history, and now stands as one of the most beloved driver's cars ever created. Its legacy is not measured only in trophies or prices, but in the way it continues to inspire passion, debate, and admiration across generations of automotive enthusiasts. Looking back across 5 decades, the Kawasaki Z1900 stands as more than a motorcycle. It is a declaration of ambition and a symbol of transformation. It showed the world that Japanese manufacturers were not just capable of matching established rivals, they could surpass them, and in doing so, it rewrote the very definition of what performance on two wheels meant. This was not a story of displacement alone, but of vision, timing, and the courage to release a machine that asked riders to rethink their relationship with speed and reliability. The Z1 arrived at a cultural crossroads where motorcycles were becoming more than transport, embodying freedom, rebellion, and aspiration. Kawasaki seized that moment with a machine that was both powerful and approachable, thrilling yet practical, daring yet dependable. The result was a motorcycle that not only dominated the road, but also reshaped the landscape of competition, engineering, and rider identity. Its influence carried through the decades in racing triumphs, in the evolution of Kawasaki's own lineup, and in the broader superbike wars that defined an era. Even today, the DNA of the Z1 is alive in every high-revving four-cylinder sport, bike, every retro-styled homage, and every story told by a rider who remembers the shock of that first ride. What makes the Z1 so enduring is not just its numbers or accolades, but the way it bridged opposites: blistering acceleration with everyday reliability, flamboyant style with mechanical honesty, and raw competition with universal appeal. It was, in short, a motorcycle that made the future tangible long before anyone expected it. As we close this exploration, remember that the Z1's legacy is not frozen in history. It continues to echo each time a rider chases performance on the street or track, and each time a collector restores one to its original glory. Thanks for riding with us on Octane Origins. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.